Well, the war continues, and while we celebrate the release of Idan, one of the hostages, we recognize the how complex that is that an American hostage was released through the efforts of President Trump, and yet the other hostages remain every day, creating a more and more dismal, dangerous outlook. The suffering in Gaza continues unabated, with hunger setting in deeper every day. Situation in the West Bank remains very challenging. We'll see one aspect of that in a few weeks as we come together to see the movie No Other Land. And it's not a great time for optimism. So, Sechel Yashar, common sense, is on the agenda today with everything else. In the book of Proverbs, and hopefully our study will somehow influence the world in our small little way. With that in mind. Okay. We continue. This section of Proverbs is named The Wisdom of Solomon, is the ongoing collection of two-liners, sometimes three-liners. We'll see one today. Hard, as usual, to group into subunits. Done my best. Wasn't really able to find the usual literary devices that I'm able to find that would help me do this, but with a certain sense, I don't know if how subjective, how objective it is. I've divided into these following smaller sections. And why don't we begin with the first one? Richard, you want to read 1 through 2?
Better a dry crust with peace than a house full of feasting with strife. A capable servant will dominate an incompetent son and share the inheritance with the brothers.
Okay. Initial comments, reactions?
No.
I don't understand the last two lines at all.
Okay. The reason that I delineated this way in these two verses is it seems to be something in the household as opposed to what comes afterwards. And I'm always looking for ways to make more bite-sized pieces. So we'll get to the second section in the beginning, but the first part, the first line is pretty easy to understand, right? I mean, it's better to be slightly impoverished. The second line is interesting because the Hebrew is me by this. Oh, this is the tradition. There are certain proverbs that are this is better than that, right? And it's better to have that first line than to have a house which is filled with zivche riv. Here translated feasting, zivche, feasting with strife. Riv is argument, strife. Zevach is a sacrifice. And so many commentators see here that perhaps the background of the expressions, in other words, assuming there's already an idiom, expression ziv riv, in the time when not everybody was partaking of sacrifices, but it comes from a situation where everybody wants a piece of the sacred meat, of the sacred food. This kind of pushing. And there's a few rabbinic traditions that talk about this. Well, we had one. What were we doing recently in the last week or so about the Babylonian Jews who were criticized for with the scapegoat for criticizing for trying to pull out the hairs. Everybody wants a piece of the sacred. So for whatever reasons they want to be up close. There's this horrible story of two young priests who are fighting their way up a ramp to get to a particular sacrifice first. Whoever got there first got to do it, and one pushes the other. And according to one of the pushes the other off the ramp. according to one of the versions, it's a story that has a number of parallels. He actually stabbed him with a knife. It's horrible kind of situation, right? This pushing to get close to whatever it is that's considered to be holy, and that's probably the background. To my mind, that's the background of the phrase, Zivchei Riv. Everybody wants a part of the holy meat, but here I think the feasting with strife is really a good way to, feasting is plenty. All the tsurs that wealthy families might have because of the money issues that come up. Sometimes better to have less resources. A common theme on TV, of course, in many series. So I think that's that. So that's the beginnings. The second one has to do with one way of looking at it is it might be the fact that if you're a servant in a household, right? So a capable servant is Eved Maskil. Eved can mean servant, can mean slave, can mean devotee. But let's say a household employee, right? You're the help. Somebody who's really smart, again, we see this in movies and TVs all the time, who rises to power in the household because they're just very clever. So that capable servant, it will easily be, even though he's a servant and the son is part of the bloodline, he can dominate him through his seichel. And eventually even become heir of the estate. And on one hand, Fox says he cannot believe that the author or the editor of Proverbs would put in a section that would be kind of encourage slaves and servants to outsmart their masters or their masters' sons. He can't believe that. I think that's what this is. I think this is a kind of a wink in the eye to those servants who are the underclass, the lower classes, that if you're smart and you learn your lesson, you're wise about it, you can rise through the ranks, even though you don't have the right bloodline. Does that make any sense to you, Les?
Well, now that you explained it, but I read it a little differently. I didn't understand the connection between the servant and the incompetent son, but now it sounds like you've got, as you said, a servant who is like managing the household and make sure that if one of the sons is incompetent and using wasting resources or whatever, the servant makes sure that the other brothers of that son get their share. I didn't see the servant. I don't necessarily see it's the servant that's sharing in the inheritance, just the brothers of and the son.
So I hear what you're saying. If you look at the Hebrew, the subject is an Eved Maskil, this wise servant. And so there's a few verbs that come after that. Yimshol, right? He will dominate. And the verb that comes after that is yachlok, and he will inherit. So it seems to me the inner logic, the linguistic logic of these two lines is that those two verbs go with the servant. So
That is kind of sneaky, though. I mean, you're right.
it's subversive. It's subversive. I like it. I like it very much, and he kind of leaves it up in the air. Fox, in general, Fox. That's this really wonderful commentary I've been using from the Anchor Bible series. You can see this is only half of it. It's a pretty thick one. For this section, his comments are far less detailed than they were for the other sections. I think he almost throws up his hands in the beginning of his introduction and say, well, there's not a lot to say about these. These are two-liners. I'll try to explain what I can. And sometimes he often has interesting comments, but I think there would be a lot to say. Unfortunately, the other commentary that I have that I never really used other than to look up particular verses here and there has rearranged the entire book. Certainly these chapters, he divides he doesn't take them as they come. He pulls out different two-liners that under certain subject headings, and then he talks about them individually as a group, as if they're connected to each other. To my mind, that doesn't take into consideration what Professor Moshe Greenberg of blessed memory taught us to, what he called a holistic approach, in which we want to try to figure out while we're interested in the individual literary units, we also want to figure out, so what does this mean the way it's been handed over to us after the
What did
end?
the editor intend?
Yeah. And this is a book that certainly there's the author of the proverb itself, the advice, the two-liner, if you will, in this section. And maybe and probably not the author as much as the translator from other traditions. And then there's the editor who brought it together, brought the whole book together, or the editor of this particular section. Yeah, a lot of hands at work here. Okay, so
Just comment.
yeah.
I think I take issue with you as to what uh, the meaning is. It seems that it's more of a warning than advice, particularly when you pair it with the previous two lines.
Yeah, that's a good point. And essentially, that's what Fox says. I didn't get.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, he says he can't believe it would be subversive. I, of course, love the subversive, so that's where I go. I'm reminded of a conversation with the dean of the rabbinical school when I was brought in for my final oral exam, and they also wanted to ask me about my thesis that I wrote about the ancient cycle of Torah reading in the land of Israel, and which I was very strong about saying that there was no order in the ancient land of Israel that came afterwards. At the beginning, different communities read at their own pace. It took around 3.5 years. And the dean looks at me, who is a very well-respected historian and archaeologist of rabbinic Israel. He says, well, you surely don't believe that there was no set by the sages order of how to read it. I said, Israel, we all come to our study with our background. I'm a hippie. I think that they all did what they wanted to do. You're a really straight Yekish kind of a guy. You think that everything was regulated. Did not curry much for favor, but by that time the bridges were already burned, so it didn't matter. Okay. Anything else? Yeah, I actually I hear what you're saying also in the after what I've done, which Fox didn't do, is group these four lines together. That would be, and that's what I kind of thought. What's happening in the household? Yeah, it is a warning. Yeah, and also, by the way, I'm not sure the servants would be studying this literature. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Zivchei Reeve, fighting over the spoils. Zivchei Reeve. Okay, Richard, why don't you read another one, 3-5? Because you're the money guy in Or Hamidbar.
For silver, the crucible, for gold, the furnace, and God tests the mind. An evildoer listens to mischievous talk, a liar gives ear to malicious words. One who mocks the poor affronts their maker. One who rejoices over another's misfortune will not go unpunished.
Okay. Next, initial reactions or comments?
Well, I don't like the last line.
You don't like it, or you think in other words, you want to be able to rejoice.
Yeah, of course I want to be able to rejoice.
Well, we'll get to that in a second, Richard. I think that's the first word of the title, which I never pronounced correctly, but
Schadenfreude, yes.
Schadenfreude.
Explain the first two sentences. I don't get
Yeah.
that.
So the first sentence is actually the first three lines. This is an example of a three-liner as opposed to a two-liner. I would say, to me, 3-5 are about character modification, behavior modification, so to speak. And so the Wiseman here is saying that in the same way that silver is mitzarfim, that's the verb that's used, or it's in, yeah, the two verbs / nouns that are used for each of the metals are also interchangeable. I think seruf, which is crucibling. What's the word? Not distilling. What do you do with metal? Purifying. There's a word for it.
Smelting.
No, smelting is form. Yeah, no, but how do you take the icky stuff out of a metal, precious metal? What's that verb called?
Purify.
There's another word, Richard.
Refining?
Refining, I think probably refining. There may still be. Anyway, so the refining of silver and the refining of gold, they're done much in the same way, but for the poetic aspect, he used two different things. In the same way that you refine precious metals, right? You put them through extreme heat in order for the icky stuff, what is called the, not residue, the, no, help me out,
The
guys.
chaff?
Impurities.
Impurities. The chaff is with grain.
Right,
So
yeah.
it's called the impurities, the dross, maybe? Maybe the
That,
word is, I think perhaps it's dross is the word I'm looking for.
I think dross are the impurities, I
Yes,
thought.
that's what I,
Yeah,
you
right.
do that so you can separate the dross out of the pure metal. That's the same thing that God does with the mind. And it's amorphous, right? But I think it's character building. I'm thinking of basic training in the army. I'm thinking of what maybe hazing was at one point supposed to be. I'm thinking of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Those kinds of things here. Um, does that does that make sense to you, Les?
I don't understand what a crucible is, I guess.
Oh, I look at the Hebrew mitzaref. Let's see what his translation is here. He may have a different translation. Tziruf is exactly that verb, which is really interesting because tziruf also means for people to come together. But
So I
there's
looked it up and it says a heat-resistant container used to melt metals.
yeah, it's like you see on film where it pours. They heat it up, pour, and it goes to in the Lord of the Rings. There's a really cool scene with that where the dwarves are smelting.
Also in Hamlet and the Crucible, the play The Crucible. In Hamlet, the three witches, weren't they at a cauldron?
Right, but I
heating up
always
the
thought of
water?
that as like they're making soup.
Well,
That's what I
they could be refining silver too.
so Fox translates a smelter for silver, a furnace for gold. They're just two different words for the things that are used in the process of the smelting, of the refining of the metal.
But is he making, or the author making a distinction between how you treat silver and how you treat gold?
No, I don't think so. I think they're parallel. I think that's just a parallelism. And in the same, and then you go other places with it, right? The most precious metals, the mind. Here is here it says mind, but the word is libot, the hearts. Bochen libot, bochen is usually bochen levavot, Adonai. This is where God makes a guest appearance as well, right? But so to my mind, this is a comment about I think suffering, testing, yeah, that's how you. There's a really lovely. Maybe I should have brought it, although it's not connected to this directly, but because of the word tzadi resh pei tzaref, which has to do with the smelting process. I said no to somebody who said smelting beforehand, but actually this is the smelting process, the refining process. Is a midrash about on Abraham saying, God only gave the mitzvot kedei litzaref b'nei Adam, litzaref b'nei Adam, which some people, modern Israeli readers read that and this is, oh, to bring Abraham, in the context of Abraham, the mitzvot, the commandments are given to bring people together. And I like that. You bring, because also the word mitzvah is connected to tzavta, which means people together. So there's something bringing people together. But the simple meaning of the rabbinic text there is that the mitzvot were created to refine your character modification, character betterment. And this became a major bone of contention with that aforesaid dean and some of the others in rabbinical school when I was there. I was an older student. I had probably a better rabbinic education than most, if not all the other students, because I'd been to yeshiva and been to Hebrew University for 7 years before I got there. And I remember I said at one point in a conversation, every week we had a public conversation, all the students over coffee, about how halacha, Jewish law, to me is irrelevant if it's not educational. If it doesn't bring something, if it doesn't lead us to our values in an educational way, I don't see the point of halacha. And they, of course, called me in on that and said, well, that's the reform movement says those kind of things. The conservative movement, we say, no, halacha is binding because it's part of the covenant between the people of Israel and God. And I'm not drawn to that part of halacha as, our end of holding up the deal. I don't think God needs us to do any of these things. I think we need to do it to come together to refine ourselves. So that's one connection that I would have with this. But then, of course, we get to the part that Richard loves so much, and there's actually two parts to that, Richard, that are said unless there's anything else before that. There's that one line, Sheker Mezin, which is interesting. A liar gives ear to malicious words. That assumes that the word is ma'azin with an aleph from like ozen, and it contracts because of the way people spoke. Some words contract, you know. Yeah, our languages have those kind of contractions, especially in slang. And so in this case, the lie literally gives ear mazin, but it can also mean mezin. It fuels. It from mazon, from food. It feeds. It feeds. Yeah, a liar feeds into malicious words. Okay, and now the lag larash. The reason that those two pairs are bold is because those are common expressions in modern Hebrew. Like I've done from time to time, I'll highlight something like this. And loeg larash, or that is somebody who does mock, or is in the process of mocking the poor. We'll see how that was used in rabbinic literature in just a moment. But what it's used for in modern Hebrew is making fun of somebody who's unable to do it differently, of the disabled, for instance. Lag Larash would be a stairway and no elevator to the office. Now, I know it's law in California, but in the old days, a stairway or an elevator to an office where the people who are unable to walk or disabled are there to get to see a social worker or something like that. That's Lag Larash. Speaking another language in front of somebody who doesn't understand it to talk about them, that might also be considered figuratively mocking those who are poor in language skills. There's a lot of usages for it that one might think of. And here is just a general kind of a thing, but really probably just talking about general, and then it's talking about generally poor people. Those who make fun, who mock poor people, they're insulting God. And the question is that because they're insulting? I'll tell you how it probably is but how I would like to see it. It probably means that people assume that if somebody's poor, that's God's doing. So if you make fun of their poverty, you're making fun of God's declarations, God's decrees. That's very difficult. We don't really subscribe to that kind of theology, I think, any of us here at the table. But another way to look at this is that if each and every individual, and one has to add words for this comment to make, if each and every individual is been created in the image of God, if you see somebody who is less noble in their humanity, you're basically making fun of God. Maybe that's a way to say it. So before we get to the last line, any comments about that?
What's the Hebrew word for poor? Is that actually poor, like not enough money, or is
Yeah,
it?
Rosh is poor. Usually, yeah, it's not used in modern Hebrew, but Resh Shin is parallel to Ani, which is used in far more Hebrew. Yeah, yes. Look, again, it's poetry. So does it mean just somebody who has no money, or does it mean somebody who's disadvantaged in many other ways or all other ways? I think often, yeah, okay. And now to Richard's favorite parts, Sameach La'ed. This too has been taken from the verb of Sameach, someone who is rejoicing over misfortune. of another person, that is implied here, is the simcha le'ed we use in modern Hebrew. Rejoice over somebody's misfortune, which is Schadenfreude. And both of those things, interesting that both of those terms used in modern Hebrew come together in the same verse. I didn't know that beforehand. I often see the roots for lots of phrases and expressions in modern Hebrew in this study that we're doing. Yeah, I mean, it's spelled out in a biblical verse, being polo ivecha al tismach, right? And when your enemy falls, don't rejoice. The famous midrash of the angels breaking out into song when the Israelites pass through the sea and the Egyptians are dying, and God says, "How dare you sing? These are my creations who are drowning in the sea," which many of us recite just around the time of taking the 10 drops of wine out of the cup at the Seder to kind of diminish our joy over the plagues. Yeah. Okay, so Dan, why don't you read the two Talmudic passages for us?
One may not walk in the cemetery with phylacteries on his head and a Torah scroll in his arm and read from it. If one does so, he commits a transgression due to the verse, "He who mocks the poor blasphemes his creator."
Okay, something I'm sure we all thought of doing when we visit our loved ones in the cemetery. But this is actually, I didn't see it here, but this is the reason in halakha. You'll notice if you're ever if you are in the cemetery with a Chabad or person who wears their tzitzit outside, if they know the halakha, they push their tzitzit inside of their pants. They tuck them in when you're at a cemetery. And that's kind of common, and as somebody who wore tzitzit and had them out from time to time in my life, that's something I remember doing. The idea is you're mocking the dead because they cannot perform the mitzvah the way that you can. Now, this is very selective, right? Because of course we're saying psalms, we're honoring, we're doing a lot of things that are connected to our worship with God in the cemetery. So it's very selective, but I found a number of passages in the Talmudic tradition. I only brought two here, and all of them connected this to death in some way. I would have liked to have seen some more practical examples in life. I mean, it is life for the people that are living, but why don't you go ahead and read the other one from Sotah?
When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, "A corpse occupies 4 cubits with regards to the exemption from the recitation of Shema, so that it's prohibited to recite Shema within this space. As it is written in the verse, whoever mocks the poor blasphemes his maker."
Okay, again, not something we think about, but if, let's say you are guarding over, a Shiva boy is guarding over the body of somebody at the mortuary, which I think many of you have heard of before, the Shmirah kind of a thing that's done. Well, if it comes time for Shema in the morning and they're afraid they're not going to make it, but these are the things that you've got to distance yourself from that, which is an interesting thing. It's interesting. You could say Psalms, but you can't say Shema, because Shema is one of the mitzvot, one of the 613 mitzvot commandments. Okay, anything on this topic?
I just have a question though. Attending the body is also a mitzvah, right?
Right, but of course you're not going to obviously you're not going to ad absurdum say, I'm not going to attend to the body of the death because I'm ridiculing the death because he can't do it to somebody else.
Right, but you said that somebody would then leave the body and go outside, recite Shema.
Oh, I see. First of all, to go outside is 4 amot, is 4 cubits away, which is 6 feet. And second of all, it's not a mitzvah to sit next to the body. That's a custom that's halakha. It's not a mitzvah in the same way that Shema is from the Torah. And the halakha grew, if you ask me, the halakha grew out of the fear that something would desecrate the corpse, the cadaver, either a rodent or bugs or some other way, some other thing, something. It's to give honor to the cadaver, which is why. Um, and and so in the liberal world, once we had refrigeration and bodies were preserved in such a way and they weren't exposed to the elements or to rodents or cockroaches or whatever it might be, something that gives all of us kind of the heebie-jeebies to think about. It remained in certain circles, in Orthodox circles, Hasidic circles, out of just as a respect for the deceased, but also in a world in which the funeral was the next day. So there's a whole context to that whole custom of Shmirah. I'm assuming people have heard of that. I mean, Megan, have you ever heard of Shmirah? Yeah, you have. Okay. Susie, do you know what we're talking about? Yeah. Okay. All right. So this idea, yeah, and there's something I understand this. We did it when we were in high school. We did it also. We were asked to come and take a few hours and say Tehillim, and people do it. Um, when people ask my advice, it's absolutely not necessarily. It's not disrespectful for the dead to have them in the refrigeration. It's not disrespectful in the dead to wait a week for the funeral either, if we're waiting for loved ones to come from other parts of the world to be. I mean, there's no objective, no objective standards here. It's by definition, it's subjective. What is to the honor, the dignity of the deceased. Anything else? Okay, last 6 to 13. So we've gone from character modification back to family structure, household. It's iffy, but yeah, it's the best I could do.
Grandchildren are the crown of their elders, and the glory of children is their parents. Lofty words are not fitting for a villain, much less lying words for a noble. A bribe seems like a charm to its user. It brings success at every turn. One who seeks love overlooks faults, but one who harps on a matter alienates friends. A rebuke works on an intelligent person more than 100 blows on a fool. Evildoers seek only to rebel. A ruthless messenger will be sent against them. Sooner meet a bereaved she-bear than a fool immersed in nonsense. Evil will never depart from the house of one who repays good with evil.
So the common denominator for me here were these kind of two things that contradict each other, kind of thing, in the same way, and also they're kind of um, what would be a good word for this? They're kind of the edge of what I think many of us describe as wisdom. There's a cockiness to some of them. So let's take them one by one. Let's somebody want, perhaps first reactions or questions. All right, then let's go ahead.
Just the first of them seems, let's see, more benign than the remaining six.
So I hear what you say, benign to my mind, but there's also this kind of inner inconsistency to the two sides. It's inconsistent in a different way. We're led to believe in the first line is that if we go to the Hebrew first, because a lot of this has to do with how you present it in language, what comes first? Ateret kenim, right? The crown of the elders, the pride of the elders. Elders, meaning the grandparent situation, are the bnei vanim, the children of children, grandchildren, so literally grand. And so this kind of, you have in your mind grandparents. Some of us have been blessed in that way, and the grandchildren around with the children, and there's this kind of fulfillment of the verse in Psalms, Ure vanim levanecha shalom Yisrael, and you're blessed with you shall see children of your children, And then you shall have a feeling that there's peace upon Israel, right? This when you have these three generations, because there's war gets in the way often. That's literally. And so you have this idea of the grandparents looking on, but then you go to the opposite direction. You go, and so it's not contradicting, but it's kind of an opposite. You go then from the children, right? The Tiferet, again, starting with the splendor, the glory, whatever, of the Banim, of the children themselves are their parents. Yeah.
Well,
Anyway.
sort of the children, which is the middle generation, is in the middle with the grandparents above and their children, the grandchildren below.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, not contradictory, but different, going at it from different directions. I think that's, yeah. I'm searching, look, and I'm struggling to find things to bring it together. But in any case, we get it for what it is. The doublet as it is, I think we understand, right? There's this loveliness of mutual respect, kind of like the end of Dan, you know, the Haftarah of Shabbat Shuvah, Shabbat Hagadol, at the end of Sefer Malachi, Hine Anochi Sholech Lachem et Eliyah Hanavi Lifnei Voyim. Lev Avot V'Heshiv Lev Avot al Banim V'Banim al Avotam, and God will cause the hearts of the fathers to come together. Oh, what's the translation? Something like, may the heart, this coming together of different generations. V'Heshiv Lev Avot al Banim Lev Banim al Avotam. God will bring together the hearts of the parents upon their children, and their children upon their hearts. It's bridging of the gap. That's the same idea that's expressed here. But now we get to some complicated ones. The next one is the translation here is lofty words are not fitting for a villain. The Hebrew's lo navat starts with not fitting for a villain or a louse of some sort. Naval is an interesting word. Sfat yeter. So Safar lips is Safar's language. The Sfat yeter, I think most of us would say Sfat yeter is superfluous language, excessive language. And there are those translators that went in that direction. That is, Fox goes in that direction. I think that's the simple meaning, but for another tradition of the translations goes high words, lofty words, fancy language. So I don't see how that. I don't see that much less lying words for a noble in this comparison. In other words, the parallel of lying words, I think, would be too many words as opposed to lofty words. I don't know. That's this again though, comparison of two edges of the group, the villains and the noble.
And lofty also be sort of very truthful. And that, that's the opposite of lying.
Yeah, except for
I'm looking at the English word, not the Hebrew word.
yeah, I just don't know how it gets there. I don't know how they got there to. Let me see if perhaps he's got
Heavenly, true, truth. What's the Hebrew word again?
yeter. So excessive. Hebrew yeter can mean remainder, inapplicable here, or surplus. That's what I understand. Much, too much, as is in a number of other places. Translations implying a rhetorical quality, such as fine speech in some of the translations, or lofty words in our translation, he says are unwarranted. Unwarranted. So it would be interesting to hear from the editors why they chose that word here. Yeah. Okay. Now comes also a tricky one, a hard to understand one, right? Remember, this is we understood this is a book of wisdom for the good guys, and teaching children what are the good ways of living your life. And what do we have here? A bribe seems like a charm to its user. In other words, it works, although it says seems, right? So Evan Chain, Hashochar beinei balav. So seems here is beinei, in the eyes of, and that's how it's perceived. And then, of course, because and it's not, it's just a continuation, it's the explanation, because it brings success at every turn. It actually works. Of course, we're reading this in the context of our president traveling in the world right now, receiving gifts, and yeah.
Is it being sarcastic though? Is it sort of saying, you may think the bribe is going to work, but maybe it doesn't?
Yeah, but then it doesn't say that though. You know
No,
what I
it
mean? It leaves us hanging in the air to reach that conclusion on our own. That's why I said this is an interesting collection of these kind of, if we go back, maybe subversive kind of pieces of wisdom. It's also unclear who's the subject here.
Who has the success? The briber?
Right, or
Right.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's go on. So the next one. This one is a little bit easier for us to understand, I think, right? If you like somebody, you're less inclined to see the faults. But you should know, though, if you want to point out the faults of someone you love, I think, is someone who you favor is in the background of the second line here, then that's just going to alienate you from them. So again, in the spirit of the news of this last few days, what do you criticize? How's it criticized? Not just the regular go-to that we do between comparison of Fox News to CNN or whatever it might be, or two sides of an argument or perceived argument on Facebook, and social media. Yeah, what's going to happen now to the people who have been very supportive of Trump in media, for instance, that are getting on his case because of this airplane thing? What's going to happen to them? And what do people overlook because they happen to like, for various reasons, or like one candidate or far more dislike the other candidate? Yeah. Okay, anything else? But that being said, lest you become overwhelmed by what we just read, you've got the next line: a rebuke works on an intelligent person more than 100 blows of a fool. So perhaps you should reevaluate who your friends are after the last verse was said. Also not entirely, clear what this means here. The evildoers seek only to rebel. That is that we hear a lot as well. Ach Mary v'keshra, right? So the Mary are those that rebel. It's, in other words, people that are rebel are evildoers, or the people who are doing what they're doing are only in order to rebel. Yeah, I think I said that right. People who buck the system, are they doing it because they just want to buck the system? Or are they, and because that's part of their evilness? Or have they become evil because they have bucked the system? I guess it depends where you start out from. Maybe that wasn't clear. But then the second part is difficult. Well, who is this ruthless messenger sent against them? And in the history of interpretation of this verse, there's a choice. The commentators, there's the rabbinic commentators here, they're choosing between, is it a flesh and blood messenger, or is it an angel? Back to the ancient translations, the Septuagint, the Greek translation, has this as being a divine being. Yeah, had I had more time on this, I perhaps would delve deeply on this first to see what kind of examples rabbinic literature might give from biblical stories. Okay. And now we meet what I think is my favorite one, which is is the headline here, right? It's better to meet a bereaved she bear. Now, I don't know how why they got the she bear exactly. Pagosh dov shakul ba'ish. It literally means a bereaved bear. Yeah, a bear who's lost their cub meets a person, right? And but the way that the structure is when you have that this happening than to is the next line Valksil bivalto, and it's better to do that than to meet a fool who's immersed in their nonsense. This expression, and why a she bear of all places? I wrote down there's two other situations in the Hebrew Bible, one in 2 Samuel, one in Hosea, that talk about this bereaved she bear, but I neglected to look them up. Um, let me give me a second, and I'll see if there's something we can.
It's sort of the modern context use of mama bear.
Well, how is that used? Explain.
Oh, mama bear was something that when Sarah Palin was running for vice president, she referred to mama bears, Alaska, that protect their young.
Uh-huh.
You don't want to aggrieve them because you'll be sorry.
Oh, and insinuating that she's the mama bear?
She and people of her ilk who defend children are mama bears.
Okay.
They'll do anything for their children to protect their children. And ruthlessly do it.
Uh-huh. So Sarah Palin must have been well versed in Proverbs.
Rabbi.
In just a second, 2 Samuel 17,
Yeah.
it says, Hushai continued that your father and his men are courageous fighters, and they are desperate as a bear in the wild, robbed of her whelps. Your father is an experienced soldier, and he will not spend the night with the troops. So that's about Achitophel, Absalom, that rebellion, I would imagine. Yes, Harold.
I'm reminded too of the story of, I think it was Elijah, who was being taunted by kids, and these two bears came out and devoured the kids. And
yeah,
it's like you don't get a bear angry, and they're also it's not that the bear was or that the bears were protecting their own young, but they were protecting Elijah. So,
right. So first of all, it's Elisha, his student, not Elijah.
Elisha.
That's easy to. And so I also thought of that right away, Harold, but exactly that's actually what it's not. The story of Elisha is that they were the children, the lads were making fun of him. Ale karech, go up, you bald one, baldy. They called him a baldy. He got upset, and he calls these bears this miracle happens, and this is where the rabbinic saying comes from. They came out of the forest, and the rabbis say, "Lo dubim v'lo yar." There were no bears there, and there was no forest there to say that it was a miracle. It's a double miracle. Not only did the bears come, but they came out of the forest that wasn't there before this whole thing. That's their idea. But that became facetiously in Israeli slang mostly when somebody says something outrageous or unbelievable, people say "Lo dubin v'lo yar." Don't be silly. That's there's no such thing. That's not a thing. Unlike that, though, in the two passages in Samuel and Hosea, and here, the expression is based on how exactly what Les said. This mama bear thing, how a bear whose whelps have been taken away from her, either been killed or whatever, how angry she would become. There's probably some other metaphors or symbolic language from the animal world that we use. Maybe something about a dog. I don't know. Yeah. In any case, that's in other words to set the bar, the high bar for the height of nastiness, of anger. Yeah. And yet that's not even comparable to a fool immersed in their nonsense. And then we get to this last part, Meshiv Ra Tachat Tova. That's also something you hear in modern Hebrew, that somebody does, I think maybe no good deed goes unpunished, people might say in English. So Dan, why don't you read the Midrash here?
Rabbi Yochanan began, one who repays good with evil, evil will not move from his house. Rabbi Yochanan said, if your friend received you with serving you lentils, receive him with serving him meat. Why? Because he performed an act of kindness for you first. Rabbi Shimon ben Abba said, it is not only one who repays good with evil, but even one who repays evil with evil, that evil will not move from his house. Rabbi Alexandri said, one who repays good with evil, as the Torah said, if you see the donkey of your enemy crouching under its burden, shall you refrain from assisting him? You shall surely assist him. Regarding him, it says, when he repays good with evil, evil will not move. Rabbi Berechia interpreted the verse regarding these generations, the generation of the flood and the generation of dispersion, as is written after the flood. The entire earth was of one language and of common speech.
Meaning was repaid, evil stayed. I'm not sure actually how that fits in. Repaid. But I think we understand the idea of creating culture, even though it might be justified to Richard to be happy when your enemy fails.
When they go low, we go high.
Yeah, I got that part. That reference to modern American politics I got. Yeah. Lot of water has passed through the Jordan, as we would say in Hebrew, since that was said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, how about that?
By the way, she was eating dinner here the other night in Palm Springs, both of them.
At someone's house or at a restaurant?
Alice B., the Obamas had dinner on Saturday night.
I missed it. Well, I'm slated to go there with Ira Health, and Ira and John just moved to that complex.
Oh.
So, okay, well, good to know. Yeah. Good to know. All right. I think I don't think we can finish in the next 6 minutes, so I think we're gonna hold off with getting, this section is also quite complicated. Or is complicated. But what can I say? We'll get through this. We've got another 4 chapters of this particular section to go, and then we should have a little bit more to bite into from a compositional point of view, I hope. Messaging. Any comments or questions? Okay, Richard, where's the cocktails tonight, this evening?
They're going to Willie's Modern Fair, but I won't be there.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I have a doctor's appointment.
Okay, all right.
I have to sign off. I have another Zoom that starts in 2 minutes. So.
Okay, friends, thanks for being here. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.